Video games have been flooding into Steam, Valve's digital distribution service, at an unprecedented rate. There are all sorts of games now. There's something for everybody, if anybody can find what they're looking for. It can be tricky to decide what to pick up during the service's annual summer sale, which brings deep discounts on a great many games. What should you grab? Here are the top games to pick up in the 2015 Steam Summer Sale, as selected by the staff of blackmanandrobin.com. Hot Tin Roof is the first game on our list, and for good reason. Hot Tin Roof is a Metroidvania in which you play as a square detective in the world of boxings. You're assisted by Frankie, your cat, and you must solve crimes and uncover a conspiracy involving murder, impoverished rats, and a suspicious chewing gum factory. The game has a great sense of humor and a rather interesting story. I have to confess to having not yet beaten it. I'm most of the way through the game, but I still feel safe recommending it. The gameplay is interesting because it mashes together elements of other games very well. While the platforming takes place on a 2D plane, you must at times switch between planes Fez style. Then, too, there's your gun, which isn't really used as a weapon, but as a versatile tool. For instance, you might load it with chewing gum, and then shoot the gum into a moving obstacle in order to stick it in place. Overall, Hot Tin Roof is a very well-made game. It has some very bold and creative design elements, and is overall worth playing. My next recommendation goes to Kerbal Space Program. Now, Kerbal Space Program is a game that I've loved for quite a while. A mere few weeks ago, the game saw a full launch as it left Steam's Early Access program. In case you've not heard of Kerbal Space Program, all you need to know about it is that it's a game in which you run a space administration with a lot of money and very little regard for safety. The titular Kerbals are little green guys who are willing to go up in whatever ridiculous rocket contraptions you manage to build. That's where Kerbal Space Program really shines. You have the freedom to build all sorts of things. Do you want to build a rocket to the moon and an old-fashioned rover? Good news, you can do it. Are you more of a space plane kind of guy? Well, it's possible in Kerbal Space Program. In the game, there's a whole solar system of planets and other astronomical bodies to explore. Kerbal Space Program is a game that I love for many reasons. For starters, I love how accessible everything is in Kerbal Space Program. You really don't need to know very much about rocket science in order to get started with the game. If you know that your thrusters need to point down and that your nose needs to point up, you're about ready for Kerbal Space Program. The game's user interface makes it easy to put together and test rockets that blast off into the atmosphere. While it is simple to get started, what makes Kerbal Space Program special is just how complex it is behind the scenes. If you know actual rocket science, you can utilize that knowledge within the game. The math, physics, and concepts that you need to know are present in KSP. Kerbal Space Program is one of the most educational games I've had the pleasure of playing. Even though it's not explicitly branded as a learning game, I wound up learning a lot more about rocket science, orbital mechanics, and outer space than I ever expected. All this because, in addition to being built on real-world mechanics, the game is both fun and accessible. This is something that I feel a lot of designers could stand to benefit from, especially designers looking to make engaging interactive experiences. Kerbal Space Program is a game I recommend without reservation. If you're looking for a strange game set in outer space, I recommend Cosmocoria. Now, Cosmocoria is fantastic in its own bizarre way. You see, in Cosmocoria, you play as a baby soaring through space, armed with a laser and the seeds of life. Your goal is to plant trees across the solar system, and along the way, you'll fight off hostile aliens, giant wasps, and other hazards. You'll also meet an assortment of strange characters. The game has a bit of highly unusual story going for it. The whole experience is rather trippy. If Asteroids took a turn from bizarre, it would be Cosmocoria. Overall, it's a game worth picking up. If you enjoy surreal games, if the idea of being a baby floating through space appeals to you, check out Cosmocoria. I'm honestly not very big on twin-stick shooters. It's not that I dislike them, but most of them don't really excite me. That said, I had a really good time with Geometry Wars 3. It's a very pretty game filled with neon colors and aesthetically pleasing shapes, and your goal is pretty simple. move around on a large 3D object, destroy other objects, and don't get hit by said objects. Well, that's usually the goal anyway, as the game likes to mix it up, but I'll get into that in a moment. Now, Geometry Wars 3 is a game that I love mostly for the way that it looks. The game glows in a beautiful way. While Geometry Wars 3 probably won't tax your graphics card, it is one of the prettier games that you can play on a lower-end system, which is nice. Now, regarding the gameplay of Geometry Wars 3, there's a great amount of variety that I don't see in a lot of other twin-stick shooters. So while you're mostly using the same few moves throughout the game, that is shooting, using your smart bomb, which eliminates all enemies on screen, and occasionally using your little helper to drop mines or do other things, it's the variety in the levels that's really fantastic. Besides the fact that they're very well designed, there are some unique modes. For instance, there's one mode called King Mode, in which you must enter an ever-shrinking bubble, and it's within that bubble that you're allowed to shoot. Once the bubble shrinks to nothing and vanishes, you need to find a new bubble in order to keep shooting at the geometric shapes which are pursuing you. Now, if you decide to go for Geometry Wars 3, just keep in mind that this is a game best played with a controller, as the game's really built for one. I used an Xbox 360 controller, and it worked just fine. Telepath Tactics is a strategy RPG by Sinister Design. Set in a world of telepaths, as you may have guessed, it takes after such classics as Final Fantasy Tactics and Fire Emblem, and it boasts a rather unique steampunk universe. There are warrior women riding giant praying mantises, lizard people with a complex society, and there are dark forces at work gathering slaves to go work in their Viber mines. The game's world building is fantastic, and the story is pretty interesting as well. The game primarily follows a pair of sisters as they go on a journey to figure out what's going on in the mines, and to rescue their father from slavery. Along the way, they pick up a wild and diverse bunch of characters, ranging from a mind-reading hustlers to a straight-faced warriors of righteousness to an honest mantis rider in need of work. The characters and their clashes really make the story in Telepath Tactics. Gameplay is quite good. It's a turn-based game in which your units enter a field that's full of enemies, obstacles, and environmental hazards that, played right, can be used to your advantage. It's a good strategy RPG. If you're not familiar with games along the lines of Fire Emblem, and you're more a fan of XCOM, know that this game has a few similarities gameplay-wise, but it calls for more aggression and consideration for the typically large battlefields. If you've been looking for an SRPG with a neat story and good gameplay, check out Telepath Tactics.
They thought they would silence me forever. I fade, colder and darker.
Our next recommendation is for Endless Legend, a game that I enjoyed, and one that Jackson Simpson, a writer at BlackManAndRobin.com, also really loved. Here's what he had to say about it. While this is the summer sale, it's worth remembering that it's winter in the Southern Hemisphere, and what game could be better for that than Endless Legend? Empire-building 4X strategy games have always been best when they shut you away from the outside world, turning day to night and night to day, which is something Endless Legend provides in abundance. Where other games in the genre usually follow the route of civilizations flourishing and advancing over their environment, Endless Legend makes the brave decision to have it all take place on a planet that's shutting down, where literal near-apocalyptic winter is always on the horizon. It's perfect for the summer sale. With every race offering totally different playstyles, mechanics, and goals, Endless Legend should have something for almost all strategy fans. It's a genre subversion that's well worth playing. Robot Roller Derby Disco Dodgeball, referred to as Disco Dodgeball for the sake of simplicity, is one of my favorite games. It's a fast-paced FPS in which a disco full of roller skating robots, they seem to be unicycling but that's beyond the point, engages in neon-colored duels with dodgeballs. It's a chaotic game that I've recommended before and shall recommend again. This year, it came out of early access on Steam, and it keeps getting better all the time. It boasts several interesting game modes, such as Hoops, in which there's a golden dodgeball that needs to be carefully shot through a hoop, naturally, and of course there are the standby FPS modes, such as Team Deathmatch and Capture the Flag. Well, Capture the Cube. Disco Dodgeball has a very friendly community, frequent updates from the developer, and now, content from the community thanks to the Steam Workshop. If you enjoy fast-paced shooters, think Quake, if you've been looking for a fun and innovative twist on the FPS, and if you just love the absurdity of the concept, check out this game.
Es gibt ein Haus in Neu-Berlin, man nennt es Haus Abendrot. Es war der Ruin vieler guter Jungs, von mir, mein Gott, litt ich Not.
The next game on our list is Wolfenstein: The New Order, as recommended by Nick Gennard. After so many years of shooting games, the genre has become, to put it mildly, crowded. Newer titles almost always seem to relish quantity over quality, and they simply do not have anything new to offer us. Wolfenstein: The New Order, on the other hand, is a truly refreshing experience from beginning to end. Everything from the lush German countryside to the dystopian alternate future oozes personality and top-notch design. Wolfenstein's story is interesting enough to keep the game afloat for the duration of the narrative, but the mechanics are where the game truly shines. The New Order's gameplay is the sort of gory, gritty, in-your-face combat that a vengeful assault on cyborg Nazis should possess. More importantly, every little battle feels emphatic and necessary, not as if the protagonist is only mowing down enemies to reveal another piece of the story. All in all, Wolfenstein: The New Order is a true needle in a haystack. It offers an entertaining, beautiful, and purposeful experience for fans of shooting games. And quite frankly, you just can't find that anywhere else at the moment. Fan of RPGs? You might want to check out Pillars of Eternity, as recommended by Jackson Simpson. A little more than 10 years ago, with the explosive rise of the console truly taking over the world of games, there was a resonating cry that sadly echoed under all the music, rhythm, ritz, and man-shooter pizzazz. It said, simply, "The RPG is dead. Long live the RPG." Now we live in a world where you can't have multiplayer without some stats and leveling, and even the seminal Skyrims and Mass Effects of our time offer something completely different from what the RPGs of yesteryear provided. Pillars of Eternity comes from a time when character builds affected dialogue choices just as much as combat, where complex, sprawling worlds were the norm, and games weren't afraid to demand your full attention. If RPGs had evolved with Baldur's Gate and Planescape Torment as their guiding light, this is where we would have ended up now. With a rich cast of characters, all who offer their own unique viewpoints into the world that you're inhabiting, with thousands and thousands of detailed and beautifully written words, all there to better let you understand that world and its histories and cultures, with meaningful, non-grindy combat, smooth gameplay, a score that seamlessly transitions between the sounds of Morrowind, the First Fable, and Lord of the Rings, and actual legitimate choices and consequences. Pillars of Eternity is a must for any RPG fans and anyone looking to get lost in a massive story and fantastically realized world. Adventure games are a hallowed, beloved genre that some people don't like for relatively fair reasons. Many adventure games feature puzzles and riddles that don't make much sense. If you've ever been the victim of such absurdities in adventure games and don't want to drag together a collection of seemingly unrelated pixelated objects, or undergo any other such unfun mediocrities, you should definitely check out Kentucky Route Zero, a brilliant magical realist adventure that puts you in the boots of Conway, a trucker tasked with making a delivery to 5 Dogwood Drive, which may or may not exist within the confines of reality. Kentucky Route Zero is a truly surreal adventure game that avoids confusing, and often frustrating, adventure game elements. It's hard to talk about the story of Kentucky Route Zero without spoiling it. What I do feel comfortable saying is that it's eloquently written and takes a number of brilliant twists and turns. The game is not yet finished. It's being released in a series of acts. Purchasing it will give you access to those which have been released thus far, and those which are set to be released in the future. If you like games with good stories, if you're a fan of strange stories along the lines of Night Vale, or perhaps, a little bit at least, a series of unfortunate events, or if you love adventure games, or at least think that you hate them all, check out Kentucky Route Zero. You won't regret it. Well, that's it for this episode of... Oh, wait, no, it's time for honorable mentions. The first game that we're mentioning with honor is Discourse. Now, Discourse is a survival game of sorts. It plays out a whole lot like a choose-your-own-adventure book, However, unlike a CYOA, Discourse has some very pretty art, and there are many, many intersecting paths. For instance, if you're grievously injured early on in the game, it'll affect the rest of your playthrough. The story in Discourse is that you've crash-landed on a deserted island, and the surviving passengers who are on the plane with you are some very eccentric people. You have to figure out how to make them work together, how to avoid being killed by the various environmental hazards on the island, and just what to do in order to get rescued. While a single playthrough of Discourse will probably take you about a half hour, because of all the variables in the game, it has tremendous replayability. It's very easy to get into and well worth your time. Torin is a game that I recommend, albeit with some reservations. Inspired by games such as Ico and Shadow of the Colossus, Torin is a 3D platformer in which you play as a girl named the Moonchild. You live in the titular Tower of Torin, and it is your goal to beat the dragon that lives atop the tower. It's a very story-focused game, and my main criticism of Torin is that it seems as though the game was built around the story rather than the other way around. You can check out my full review of Torin over at blackmanandrobin.com. Essentially, though, if you enjoy strange stories and don't mind a bit of vagueness, you might want to check out Torin. If you enjoyed Sid Meier's Pirates, you'll probably want to pick up Windward during the Steam sale. Gameplay-wise, Windward essentially picks up where Sid Meier's Pirates left off. In fact, the developer had the blessing of Sid Meier himself in making the game, though that's a funny story for another day. Essentially, in Windward, you have a ship and you sail it around from port to port. You pick up cargo, passengers, fight pirates, and collect bounties. I've played a bit of this game and I really like it. I haven't yet tried the multiplayer, but the game does feature it. Imagine your favorite JRPG, be it Chrono Trigger, or Final Fantasy, or Secret of Evermore. Well, imagine if that game was not about fighting evil, but about running a campaign as Vice President of the Earth in order to make the people love you. That's essentially Citizens of Earth, which goes down the earthbound path of humor in order to create a rather strange game in which you play as the Vice President of Earth, and you're not a very popular guy. While I haven't played the PC version of this game, I have played the 3DS version, and I really like its wacky sense of humor, even though some of the jokes are kind of lame. Ultimately, it is a pretty fun game. If you're looking for less fun and more atmosphere, you'll want to check out Elegy for a Dead World. Elegy for a Dead World is a platformer with pretty minimal mechanics. In fact, it's not a game you can lose. All you can do is walk, jump, and write poetry. Oh, did I mention the poetry? Elegy for a Dead World is quite possibly the world's first and only literary platformer. You're some sort of astronaut, and you're visiting dead worlds, essentially places where things happened, and people died, and everything's all but forgotten. There are just ruins on these worlds now, and it's up to you to write about them. The game doesn't feature a whole lot of worlds, there are just 3 of them, but besides allowing you to write whatever you want within these worlds, it's also possible to play out different prompts, take on writing assignments, and to explore the words of others. You'd be surprised at the massive variety in the stories that Elegy for a Dead World is used for telling. The story or poetry that you tell or write on one world will probably be very different from that of somebody else. Elegy is a video game for writers, and it's definitely worth looking into. Our last game has hit Steam very recently. It's an early access survival game called Ark: Survival Evolved, and it features dinosaurs. Now, I haven't played a whole lot of Ark: Survival Evolved because, well, frankly, my PC's graphics card isn't the most powerful. That said, I have been able to play some Ark: Survival Evolved, and it's definitely caught my interest. Believe it or not, it actually plays a little bit like Minecraft, except instead of building structures one piece at a time, you craft them, and instead of taming wolves, you're taming dinosaurs. That said, you do punch trees in order to obtain wood. I'll be honest, I haven't cared about any other multiplayer survival games on Steam, but Ark really caught my eye. The developers are constantly patching the game in order to optimize it, not only for people with strong PCs, but for people with PCs such as my own. The game is set to see its full release next year. Also, it'll be coming to the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. Well, that's all for now. Be sure to follow at BlackmanandRobin on both Twitter and Instagram for all the latest game news, reviews, previews, and interviews. Follow me at Jordan_Cameron for my other views.